Hi guys and gals, my name's Ryan. I'm doing a YouTube video today about the fan shroud mod for the Xbox 360. I got this 360 from a friend who got the red rings of death. Obviously it wasn't under warranty anymore, so it was either I try to fix it or it's trash. I did the X-clamp mod, I did the thermal paste. Didn't fix it, so I did a reflow with a heat gun, which people mention a lot that it isn't a good idea, but I'm not going to spend hundreds of dollars on a reflow station or other equipment to fix a cheap console. So, anyway, I wanted to share my opinion about this fan shroud mod. I've seen tons of people do it, but I did it a little differently than most do, and I'll explain why. First, you'll notice the heat sinks here. This is the GPU heatsink. This is the CPU heatsink. And the first thing you should notice is the GPU heatsink is tiny. I mean, it's longer, but it's only got half an inch of clearance here. So it's not very much room for air to flow. When you look at the fan shroud, can see that this side over here is the GPU side. I mean, there's a very small amount of airspace. This is the CPU side. It gets a lot of air, which is backwards. The GPU is almost always the cause of the red rings of death, and the CPU is cooled better, and that's the reason for that. So modding this shroud does a lot of good things for the 360. The center divider here is the probably the most important part. It separates the air between the two sides. Without this, the fans pull the air equally for both heat sinks. That's not really great because the GPU heatsink is very short and restricted. So what ends up happening is that the CPU gets more air. It's totally backwards because the GPU is actually what needs more cooling. So putting that divider in there basically seals the shroud from the front of the fans here to the middle of the heat sinks, so that the fan on the left side is dedicated just for the GPU. So that's what that does. I cut a little notch in the bottom of it to go over the top of the little cylinders right there. I know those are capacitors. I'm not sure if those are too, but whatever. That goes right in the middle of that notch right there. You can play around with it a little bit and cut out the notch where that thing sits. So I also sealed the side of this with electrical tape. I extended it just a little bit beyond the bottom of the fan shroud. That seals against the bottom of the motherboard when you put it in. That prevents air from slipping underneath the shroud right here and bypassing the heat sinks. So you want as much air as possible coming from the heat sinks, obviously. The difference between what other people do and what I do is I put a cover on the GPU but not the CPU, and I'll explain why. The GPU doesn't get as much airflow. Also, another really bad design flaw on Microsoft's part was that the temperature sensor is on the CPU. There's no temp sensor for the GPU. So as long as the CPU is running cool enough, it'll let the GPU sit there and bake all day long and it won't care. That's probably the main reason why they fail so often. The temperature sensor controls not only when the unit shuts off when it gets too hot, but it changes the speed of the fans based on how hot it gets. but it does that only measuring the temperature from the CPU. Since most of the air is coming through there, it's always going to be cooler than the GPU. And this is a big problem. So because I left this open, well, when I did this at first, I put covers on both of them, and I noticed that the fans spun down really slow. I mean, it was really quiet when I first finished this. And at first, I thought that was a good thing. I was super happy. I was like, wow, what a quiet 360 I have. That's amazing. But the reality is that the fans spun down too low and weren't cooling the GPU well enough. And I actually got the red rings again because I'm sure that the GPU warped the board a little bit because it was running hot. So I reflowed it. That was before I reflowed it. I reflowed it, and then I did the mod, and I left this open. So leaving that open is going to make the CPU run just a little bit hotter than it would if you had put a cover on here. Now I could do the 12-volt fan mod if I wanted to, but my friend lives with his girlfriend. He doesn't want it to be super loud, so I thought this would be a better solution. So because it's going to run a little bit hotter, it's going to make the fans run a little bit faster. That's going to pull more air through the GPU and protect the unit. So that's why I did that. Even if you don't have the red rings of death, this is a great mod. I mean, it's essentially free. With a little bit of tape and cardboard, you're going to vastly improve the airflow that the console has. So I recommend everybody do it. The tutorial for taking it apart is in a million places online. It's a little difficult to get apart, but once you get the hang of it, it's pretty simple. So another thing I want to mention is this cardboard piece that I put on the GPU actually has another benefit. When I pulled this apart, I noticed that the bottom of the DVD drive, which sits right above this, had burn marks in it from the GPU. I mean, it got so hot it burned brown lines into the bottom of the DVD drive. Now that can't be good. I've had several 360s that failed because of the drive. Way before I got red rings, the DVD drive went out. So that could be because it is so much heat is being transferred to the drive. So that protects the drive too. The reason this flap is so important is there's actually a gap between the heatsink and the DVD drive, and even though the gap isn't that big, because there's a gap, it allows air to go over the top of the heatsink, bypassing it, and then it enters just at the end here, before the end of the fan shroud. So that's wasted air. The 360 is already starved for cooling, so that's a big problem. So after adding this flap and sealing the sides and the middle of this, I noticed that the airflow coming out of the GPU side right here is much hotter than the CPU side. That's what you want. That's a good thing. That lets you know that it's doing what it's supposed to do. So after doing this mod, and then modding the mod, so I should say, it's running really well. I've had it for a couple days. I've been testing it out on GTA 5, which I'm sure is a very demanding game. It looks amazing on the 360. I was really impressed with that game, by the way. But I figured it was a good thing to test the GPU with, since it's pretty graphically demanding. But anyway, I just wanted to share my experience and explain why I did this the way I did. And I hope this solves everyone's problems. Have a great day.